Anne wanted me to do a story about the female side of it, and the men went off to war. What did the women do? And what were they like? So I've put together one of my grandma, because she was somewhat unusual, in that she was born in Dublin, 1884, so she was a year younger than my grandpa. Her father was a surgeon and also a professor of forensic medicine in Dublin. And they lived, as I say, next door to Sinn Féin headquarters, which later in life played an important part, and that was Harcourt Street in Dublin. So she was a talented poet, and she published her first book of poetry at the age of 16 and sent it off to Queen Victoria and all sorts of people. She was fascinated by the Boer War, which had started at that stage. And so at 16 she wrote this book. And in fact I found a letter from the Queen's aide saying, thank you very much for a little book, and you're not supposed to really send books directly to the Queen, but she enjoyed it very much. So that was an interesting find. Anyway, that book was published by, I think it's Hodges, Figgis and Co., which is in Dublin. And I saw it on an archive somewhere, so I must try and find it. Anyway, her father was a bit astonished that his daughter was so bright, and I found a letter saying, to a cousin, saying, what do I do with this girl, because she's a bit intelligent, because, you know, you're not supposed to be. And he said, plenty of fresh air and exercise, I think. Anyway, she went off to, as I say, in 1904, the first influx of women into Trinity College, Dublin, where the dean had said, over my dead body. And she was somewhat astounded by the fact that you had to wear, as a woman, you had to have your head covered, had to wear black, brown, or navy. And so a later interview about Trinity in those days shows that she was a bit of a feminist. She posted a thing on the front gate saying, why do we have to have our heads covered? This is ridiculous. And are we a danger to the men? But there was no ladies' loos or anything in the college. So she had to, you know, if you're a girl, you had to, A, be all covered up. Wanted to go to the loo, you had to run to the front gate of the university. So in 1904, she started a group called the Elizabethan Society, which still goes today. And they made their own lavatories, restroom, and library, because you couldn't go to the library if you were female after about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the women sat in the laboratories because she did chemistry down one side, heads covered. So it was very difficult, and the only way to meet the men really was to go on a picnic, apparently. So I think she met my grandpa in 1902. I don't know how, I've still got to find out. But I've got a postcard in which she's written a little verse about Wales against Ireland rugby match in 1902, and he's written Wales won. So I think they must have met then, combining the poetry and the photograph and the rugby. So he goes off to East Africa, he goes off to the Seychelles first of all, and she's left behind, so she decides that she's going to do a teaching diploma, which she actually was awarded in 1908. And just to tell you, she actually qualified in chemistry in 1908 as well, 7 probably, late part of. And in 2017 they recognised that with a postgrad award called the Trinity and Sydney Auchinleck Award. So that was interesting, all those years later. Anyway, I have a letter which came from the governor's wife in the Seychelles telling her what to wear, saying don't wear open lace stockings because the mozzies get in and bite you, and wear light gauze, and telling her where she could buy them at Bourne and Hollingsworth and Peter Robinson's for £1 a pair. and to wear canvas shoes and what to expect clothes-wise. So she took off on her own, and I haven't found out how she got there, but on her own to Mahe, where the governor said you can't be a single woman for any longer than a couple of weeks, so off you go and get married. So they got married straight away. And they had 2 very nice years there, and she wrote quite a number of poems about Bralin and about the forests and the people there. And then when World War I broke out, and my grandfather joined the forces in East Africa, she was left behind with 2 young sons, the eldest being 2, and she was also pregnant. So I think she was moved by the governor to a place called Bel Air, which is just behind Government House. And she started a little school there and brought up the children and regularly sent photographs across to East Africa, which she must have got because I've got them, with the message on the back. And she seemed to settle there quite happily, although it was supposed to be Eden. Her eldest child at 2 got terrible malaria and nearly died of it. There's no A&E and no intensive care for children. It's just a doctor sitting with him all night, putting water on his forehead to bring the fever down. So she had that. She had the birth of a 3rd child, totally on her own, with help from whoever was around. And her 3rd daughter, who was born and my grandpa hadn't yet seen, fell off her high chair into a fire, so she had to deal with that. So there's no A&E then. So she had quite a bit to deal with on her own. And then, after he was sent to Kisumu, which was in summer 20 now, because we're in the 18s, 1918, she travelled on her own from Mahe on a ship with all the children across to Africa. And en route she heard that her mother had died suddenly in Ireland. And on the other hand, her sister had been awarded commendation for her nursing work in France. So had 2 medical sites, good and bad, that happened on the way, but there's no phone, so you couldn't find out what was happening, really. So she went up with him, joined him in Kisumu, and he saw his daughter for the first time when she was 2, which was an interesting episode for him. And from there, she joined Lady Baden-Powell as a leader of the Girl Guides. And at that stage, being about 1920, my grandfather hadn't had leave for 10 years, so that's when he decided to go on leave and do studies in fellowship of the College of Surgeons and his public health. And then being nearly assassinated and just escaping it due to the Irish uprising, they got back into Kenya and had to settle back down there. And I think, as I say, I think she took her father with her to escape the Irish problems. And he was there. I noticed that I found a ship's list where he went back about 3 years after the end of the war. Well, Irish, the 23, when it had settled down slightly. And from that point, on their return, he was sent to Mombasa, where he looked after the whole of the coast, really, as far as, right up far beyond Malindi and so on. And she got unexpectedly pregnant again, which is a bit of a shock, and had the 4th child, my Aunt Daphne, who had all this documentation there. She became a member of the East African Women's League, which helped all the people coming off the ships in the old harbour at Mombasa and set them off on their journeys and told them what to expect. And after that, she was sent off to Nairobi with my grandfather, where she became vice president of the East African Women's League. And her inaugural address must have put off all those people involved in white mischief, because her address said, stop drinking so much alcohol, and do some more of your own housework. So it must have been gone down like a lead balloon, probably. Anyway, she was quite fearsome, so I think might have obeyed for a while. After Mombasa, he went back up to Nakuru and then Nairobi, and he stayed in Nairobi as the senior medical surgeon at that stage. And she settled into life there, writing poetry still. And in this presentation is a picture of the Askari War Memorial, and she wrote a poem about that, which actually covers really what was said earlier, that they should be honoured. Pity that it's not on the screen that you could have a read, but that they picked up a burden from the white men which wasn't theirs, and they carried it through. And she realised that, and she said, you know, if that hadn't been done, then East Africa wouldn't have been ours, remembering that was her time. So we've got a memory of that. Then in World War II, undaunted, she became leader of women's voluntary service back in Harrow, where she got a commendation for encouraging, coercing, thousands of people to give blood. So I've got a newspaper cutting of that. And then they settled down, and she died 1970, aged 87. So she lived a long time in spite of all of that life. So it's just a little story on the side about the girls, or the girls they left behind, but didn't leave her behind. Don't think she let him.